episode 1 of our video podcast, where we're going to be talking about space debris and satellites and other interesting things going on in space. I'm Josh. This is the famous Cheyenne Mountain. We're here at the 35th Annual Space Symposium in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Let's go talk to some space experts. With me, I have retired Air Force Colonel Mike Wasson. Mike has been in the space business for 32 years. That's a pretty long time. So Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you've seen the space industry change over your very long and successful career?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Early on in my career, the space business was being transferred from all the contractors that were flying satellites. They were experts in the systems, and in the mid-'80s, the Air Force decided that they were going to take on this mission and hand it over to what they called blue suit operations. So there were Air Force units that were going to start flying satellites. So in order to make sure that we had the right technical expertise, the Air Force brought in a collection of engineers, scientists, mathematicians, so they had the technical background in order to do this very detailed work to understand the operations of the satellites and all those surrounding businesses that were related. When I was a second lieutenant, the unit I was in was out at then Falcon Air Force Base, now Schriever Air Force Base. And out of 150 people in that squadron, if you can imagine this, 135 were young officers between second lieutenant, first lieutenant, or captain, all with technical degrees. It was really incredible.
That's great.
So we were system experts. The training was fantastic. We were in-depth analysis and detail on all the satellite subsystems because we had to in case something went wrong with the satellite. Then over time, in order to kind of normalize operations in Space Command, it was decided that you wanted to try and take away the guesswork, build checklists, build more routine procedures. And what ended up happening, there was a couple of generations in between when I left as a lieutenant, when I came back as a leader in some of those organizations, that weapon system expertise the pendulum had completely swung. And so when I came back, I was getting ready to go be an ops officer in the 3rd Space Operations Squadron and flying discus satellites. And I was really excited about the opportunity, about all the young people doing all this great stuff and all the innovation we were going to do. And when I got there, everyone knew how to run a checklist. And nobody knew how to fly a satellite anymore. So for the last 10 or 15 years now, it's all been about space trying to reinvigorate that weapon system expertise. How do you get those experts back in the system, especially since you don't have that denseness of engineer background and experience. So how do you do that? You do that through training programs. And so what I've seen here now is, for the last 10 years in particular, is the level of training is just getting better and better and better. Weapons and tactics officers are innovating more, they're challenging the status quo, they're looking for tools to help them do this in a virtual environment, which is where we come in, of course. But now I'm seeing that shift back to those early days when blue suit operations started in the space business.
That's great to hear, because as you know, the space is rapidly changing, and the term contested, congested, and competitive has been around since 2011, and there's a lot of new people putting satellites up. There's a lot more satellites, and to have the expertise in the Air Force to be able to make intelligent decisions, I think that's a great thing. Can you expand a little bit about what that means for some of the stuff you saw in your operational experience?
Yeah, when that congested, contested, and competitive, the 3 C's came out at the Space Symposium, geez, I think it's been about 8 years now.
Yeah.
I had a great mentor who was advising me. I was at the JSPOC at the time out in California, and I was running the ops floor. And we had talked about at that time frame, like, how are we going to transition the thought process of our young airmen at the time into the force enhancement, worry about flying the bus, don't worry about the payload and the capability that we're delivering. How are you going to start protecting that when that becomes challenged? So through his help, we started looking at the landscape of all the positions we had at the JSPOC, and it was obvious, right? We had missile warning guys, we had missile defense guys, we had something for every specialty inside the JSPOC except for satellite experts. So we stood up a satellite protection duty officer, someone to focus on what those satellites' capabilities were and how we were providing those to theater warfighters. And then we took it the next step and thought, now that we have a good understanding of what those capabilities are, how do we defend those capabilities? I had a great weapons officer working for me at the time, Casey Beard, and I basically said, Casey, this has got to be your job. I'm going to give you 5 guys and you got to go figure this out. So we stood up a little satellite protection, protect and defend, space defense cell, if you will. And that was really the genesis for a lot of the things that you're seeing today. It eventually spun into some advanced training and experimentation. It was kind of the seed for what was the JIXBOC, now the NSDC. And now you see the collaboration between the intelligence community and the space operations community. And all of the things that is spawning into was all started with a little seed corn here in 2011 after that speech at the Space Symposium.
So it sounds like you've had a lot of influence on cultural shifts in the Air Force and new practices and things like that. Can you go into a little bit more about maybe the acquisition process and how that's changing to support some of these cultural shifts that are happening for the better?
Sure. I mean, the interesting thing at the time was the mission systems that they had cobbled together at the JSPOC, the Joint Space Operations Center. It was just a collection of a lot of different stovepipe tools. So at the time, the command, Air Force Space Command, conceived of this program called the JSPOC Mission System, and it was really going to be that next evolution system to kind of bring all these disparate tools together on one common mission platform for battle management, command, and control. Really exciting time, a lot of great potential, a lot of excitement, motivation, a lot of innovation happening at the time. And one of the things that it kind of opened us up to was the realm of commercial software, commercial capabilities. So being on the military side, we were really used to a lot of multi-year acquisition programs that were very complicated, and usually from an operational standpoint, you would give your input on what your ops requirements were, and then you would never see what was delivered because what was finally delivered came 2 or 3 assignments later. At best, you might come back on a later assignment and be able to get to see the instantiation of some of those requirements that you developed in the early stages. One of the nice things about where we were at the time in the 2011-2012 timeframe with JMS was I had the opportunity to be the operator, be the customer, and also be the one that got to influence the requirements that went to the acquisition community. And we had great interaction with a lot of commercial players at the time, a lot of satellite flyers, analytical providers, just a whole collection of really great experts in the field. And I was working closely with our FFRDC labs, national labs like MIT Lincoln Labs, and then also with some innovative ideas coming out of places like DARPA. And it was a nice opportunity to be able to kind of collect a lot of those ideas and offer that as a different way, a different approach to the acquisition problem that gave the operators a lot more flexibility. Now, unfortunately, through a lot of bureaucratic issues, we never got to see, we never got to realize some of those capabilities. And now being on the commercial side of the business, the nice thing is the rapid pace of innovation. It is so much fun to watch when you see an idea come up, you see some contractor out there that develops a best of breed capability. In the commercial world, you see that, you don't go and try and redevelop that. You adopt that as fast as you can, incorporate that, make your product stronger, right, and then move on to the next problem.
Yeah, and you have to.
And you have to survive, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, what you're talking about is a really complex organization that you were in, and how did you know where to start to influence the day-to-day activities? Like, where do you start when you have such a mountain to climb ahead of you to make a difference in the system? What did you do?
Well, there were a lot of management schemes out there, things you could do, and one of the things that General Helms directed at the time when she was the 14th Air Force Commander was this thing called a value stream map. And basically what it was a flow chart of all your existing processes. So I remember we had a team of experts in, and we locked them in a room for a week. We had sticky notes on every wall, we had butcher block paper, and we mapped out every single process for the legacy SSA systems, end to end. And we debated about how data moved, what flowed, what piece came first, what piece came next, and then over the top of that, added value. what was the value of that process? Because what we had seen, when you have a legacy system that's around for 20 years, incremental improvements come, and in the moment, those incremental improvements probably had good purpose. When you aggregate that over a 10 or 20 year period, what you find is you start to get disconnects. You forget the reason why this particular tool was added or why this other tool was no longer needed. And you find that some pieces atrophy while other pieces blossom. So by doing that value stream map, the end-to-end look, what we discovered in that process, and let me tell you, Josh, it was awesome. You go walking down the hallways of the JSPOC at the time, we had butcher block like wallpaper all the way around every hallway. Well, what we discovered was there were a lot of processes that were redundant, there were processes that we had forgotten about that had value, and there were processes that we needed to invent. And so that gave us a great end-to-end look. And really what solidified it was in the brief back process. So we had all of this data, and then when you try to bring the leadership in and explain the process end-to-end, all of a sudden things start jumping out. They start asking questions and the dialogue gets going, and now all of a sudden you've got those top 10 things, top 20 things that you need to go fix right away. And that's how we ended up prioritizing our actions at the time.
I know you've had to make a lot of operational decisions on data that you're getting, and so tell us what that's like. You know, you have to make a risk assessment decision on flight safety, and you're the guy making the call.
Yeah, so I was actually on the receiving end and on the delivery end of this particular issue, and the issue is close approaches of satellites. So I was on the receiving end of the products when I was flying Discus satellites. I had a team of orbital analysts, and they would come to me and say, hey sir, it looks like we've got a close approach between our satellite and some other secondary satellite. And we started talking about, you know, what's the validity of that? You know, what's the process that goes into generating that data? We've got to make a risk-based decision, do we maneuver or not to maneuver? And then flip that, you know, 5 years later, now I've got the team that's generating that data. And now I'm concerned that I'm producing decision quality data for them, right? So every morning I made a routine where I would come in and I had the team print off for me the list of upcoming conjunctions for the next 24 hours. And I started looking at that as a way to start doing what I call gray matter trending. You know, we didn't have the tools at the time to really decide when things were trending good or trending bad. So what I did is I come in and I look at that list, and very quickly I'd say, well, I'm concerned if it's, you know, 1 in 1,000 probability or greater chance of a collision. And I would start to look at the primary and secondary for that object, and maybe I would tell somebody about it, maybe I wouldn't, but that's when it started to get my attention. But then what I would do is day to day, looking at the same report, I would start doing the trending in my head, rather than using some kind of a tool for that trending. So the nice thing about being in the commercial world today is, if there's a human in the loop that can be automated, the commercial marketplace is going to automate the human out as fast as possible, because humans and operations are expensive. So seeing it from this aspect now, having lived it both from the customer military side, the producer on the military side, now being on the commercial side, it's really an exciting time to be in this business.
I can agree to that. Well, thank you very much for your time.
And you can check out Mike's latest article on realistic mission modeling in Milset Magazine, or online at milsetmagazine.com. As you can see, he signed my copy for me.
To Josh, my greatest fan. Enjoy.
Thanks, Mike.